being here,
Sure.
Senator. I think it's really important, and I really appreciate you being here to meet with real families and real children that are impacted by debates, because I think too often that gets lost. So thank you for being here to do that. And I would say too that the families that you've heard from today are just a few of the many families that we serve throughout our districts. And the challenges that they talked about with private insurance not picking up all the costs is common. That is very typical, where it typically referred to Medicaid or medical access dollars to provide the support for the families. That's a common occurrence, and we see that with all the families that we serve in our districts, and I know that the IU does as well. From a district perspective, what we often see too, the speech, the occupational therapy, physical therapy, personal care assistance, these are services that we provide. And one of the ongoing frustrations that we always have with the federal and the state government is how continually, when there are cuts to programs, these are local responsibilities. Again, it's all with the notion of that everyone wants to be fiscally responsible, but what they're really doing ultimately is the local districts who are the service providers are the ones who are going to do it, because we're going to serve families and we're going to serve kids, because that's what we do. That's what we're here for. But I appreciate you being here today to listen and meet with the families, because I think that's the most important part of this. So,
well, we're grateful. I know it's not an easy job you have. Being an executive is always more difficult than being in a group of legislators. I'm allowed to say that. like a county commissioner, that's a pretty tough job. So we're grateful, and I hear you when you talk about pushing down to a lower level of government responsibility without funding. There's that old expression, the unfunded mandates, has always been part of our debates, and I think probably both parties can take some responsibility in being part of that unfunded mandate problem. But this might be the most egregious and almost overwhelming unfunded mandate you can imagine. Because if we pass this bill, which I think is a very bad bill, it's wrong for a lot of reasons, but one of the principal reasons is it would basically say to a lot of states and school districts and other entities of government, a much larger share of the challenge of paying for Medicaid is now your problem. It's no longer the federal government's problem. And that alone would be devastating. And don't even want to think about the impact on our country. So we're grateful you're willing to give testimony as well on this issue.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you. So you've been with the district for...
Oh, I've been with Cornwall, Lebanon for over 20 years in a variety of different roles. So, but yeah, so we've seen, we've watched these things happen over time, where it's, and we frequently see it from the state government to the local government.
Right.
But it happens at all. And then too, I think that all the other services that are provided to families that we're talking about here, I don't think a lot of people realize how that process works with private insurance and Medicaid and all the things that are picked up as a responsibility that we know about it because in schools we're aware of it and we work with the families and our personnel, but the vast majority of people are just simply not aware of all the other things that are provided for families that they need to have in order to help their children.
I'm trying to search for positive outcomes of this debate. Even if my side of the argument is successful and we stop this bill, it still caused a lot of debates and a lot of divisions. But maybe the one singular outcome that would be positive is people appreciate Medicaid a lot more than they did even a few months ago. And I would say people in both parties and in all walks of life. But it shouldn't take this kind of a threat to Medicaid to allow us to appreciate it. But I think we're just beginning to break through as an argument where people who either didn't know a lot about the program or didn't have the program didn't have a direct effect on them are starting to starting to appreciate it. I see it in Washington. Finally, it's taken weeks and months and months, weeks and weeks and months of work. But it's starting to, people are starting to become aware of the scope of the impact that Medicaid has on people's lives. That's why I've said several times, we passed this bill to change American life and not for the better. And I don't think that's in any way even a slight exaggeration. It would be devastating. So we're grateful for leadership. So anybody else? Yes.
Senator Casey, on behalf of Josh and Kelly, Dorothy, and me, we'd like to thank you for coming in to do this today. And I'll give you a few comments about our district, but I'd like to also thank the parents because they really did put a face and a real understanding to what we're dealing with. I represent the school district in which you are right now. It is the urban public school district here, and we represent Lebanon City and West Lebanon Township. 1 out of every 5 students in our district, 20% of our students, receive special education services. And we have over 5,000 students in our district. So right now we are represented by 1,000 students receiving special ed, and of those, 700 of those children are Medicaid assistance eligible. For us, we have about a $70 million budget, and $10 million of that budget is dedicated for the direct services for special education. And of that $10 million, $7 million has to be funded locally. We maximize all available sources to include the access funding to provide us support. And the access funding directly contributes back over $300,000, which allows us to provide for an occupational therapist, 2 autistic teachers, as well as 4 paraprofessionals that we are able to fund through that money. If that money is lost, again, this will go back, as Phil has indicated, to go right back on to being required to be funded locally. What we're seeing right now is when you look at our district and you talk about the needs of some of our children, when you look at our highest needs, and we looked at just over the past year, the 12 highest need students that we have, each of them costs over $100,000 per year. And $40,000 of that $100,000 is in represented related health care services for these children. So it is important for us to realize the impact of these dollars and this whole program for the education of the children. And what we like to ask you to do is, as you've mentioned, is not only to ensure that the current access funding is not eliminated, but in addition, if we could see more increased federal funding for these required mandated services. And again, we thank you. And Dorothy, if you have any other comments?
My name is Dorothy Ague, and I'm the current access coordinator for Lebanon School District. I've worked with the school-based medical access program since 2002, and I started as a trainer. So I would go across the state and talk to schools and inform them about this program, many of whom had no idea that it existed. And no matter where I went, whether it was the poorest of districts or a more affluent district, it was always met with great relief to hear about this program because the cost of providing special education services is so high. The services are required, they're mandated to be provided, and they're also necessary for these students to thrive. So I was always met with great relief. Fast forward 15 years, I'm working with Lebanon School District, and I'm able to see the direct impact that this program has on the school. They're able to hire teachers, service providers that work with these students. Schools are able to buy medical equipment, other equipment that's necessary for the students to succeed. Just being able to provide a better quality of education, it's just so, people don't realize. And to say that the funding from this program is important is a huge understatement, and I hope that more people open their eyes and realize that losing this funding is going to have a great impact not only on special education students but also regular education students. It's very important.
And the school access program and all of the positive benefits that flow from that, that's another one of those arguments that is just starting to get on the radar screen. so forth?
We were talking about it a little earlier, and I said, you know, I've been doing this for, 15 years, and
Yep.
even people in my family don't even realize the cost
Yep.
of districts regarding special education services. But again, they're necessary. We need them for the students to succeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to join others in thanking you, Senator, for your work. What folks here may not know is this is the Senator's first session with families. We hosted you in Bucks County at the intermediate unit, and I know elsewhere in the state. And we know from our own advocacy here in Pennsylvania the impact that families can have in the conversations with elected officials, and your commitment to bringing those stories back to Washington, the extent to which we have elected officials who aren't seeing it for themselves, we really appreciate it. Now I'm struck, I have a sort of statewide perspective in the work that I do, and I'm struck by some big data points made real here. One of which is 40% of children in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania get their health care through medical assistance or CHIP. 4 out of 10. And that's been possible because we've had a 50-year agreement with the federal government. Basically, the federal government pays half of that, and the state pays half of that. And the conversation in Washington today is basically about Washington walking away from that commitment, and yet families and their circumstances would remain the same. We know that creates problems in very real terms for families, because as we sit here today, our state General Assembly, who's attempting to make modest but important new investments in basic education, special education, and early intervention, are trying to figure out how to come up with $2 billion to pay for the budget that they want to deliver for the Commonwealth. If the legislation in Congress goes through, you have to add another $2 billion to that ticket to compensate for what the federal government will be walking away from here in Pennsylvania. So, I think we can begin to translate what that means to families just from this conversation here today. And it's that big, it's that important, and we really appreciate your advocacy on this work, and hopefully we can work together to not only stop a bad idea, but make some important positive improvements going forward. So, again, thanks for being here.
Tom, thank you. I've known you a long time, and you've been in the trenches on these issues, and we appreciate that. It's I think the state government, the impact on state governments over time, as well as other levels of government, that's another argument that's beginning to break through now, but it's real, and maybe it's an area we need to emphasize more significantly. It's interesting in the debate in the Senate, individual senators, I don't know how many, but at least several, have been impacted by the interaction with their governors of the same party often, and sometimes of different parties, but certainly in the same party, and that interaction with governors and state officials, I think, has had a meaningful impact on their deliberation. So that's a critically important argument.
Senator,
Yeah.
this is a related but slightly different topic. We in Lebanon County fund what's called Renova Center. There are times when children of special needs are unfortunate in a situation where there is a parent who takes ill or passes on or physically can't take care of a child. So we take up to 25 clients, and we have had children go through the system, and they go to ears for occupational therapy and whatever, but we get a lot of Medicaid money there as well. We could not afford to keep that service available for our families if indeed the system got cut. So I just share that very briefly to say the needs are in addition at locations like that.
And how many children right now would you put in that?
I would have to ask our director the number of children when I go. It seems like a lot of our children have grown and they're coming into adulthood, but there are times we get children that come in, again, as parents age out, if they're not able to care for themselves in a group home, whatever, they go to Renova Center, and They have to have multiple diagnoses to be admitted. So it's a very caring, it's 24/7, and the staff are phenomenal there. So I just know that we also need the Medicaid and Medicare there as well. And we just, I don't know the number of children. I will find that out and get that to you. Okay.
That's a perspective we didn't have before.
Thank you.
And thanks for being here.
You're welcome.
Great.
Senator, my name is Ann Reeker, and I have the pleasure of representing all 22 school districts in the Lancaster and Lebanon area. IU13 holds the grant to provide preschool early intervention services to over 3,000 children. They're all ages 3 to 5. About 65% of our children are MA eligible, and I second what others have said, is we could have a line out the door with families who would be willing to come and share with you what MA has meant to them. But what I want to...
So you said there's 3,000 children in the IU.
And these are just preschool age children.
They get early intervention?
Yes.
Okay.
And what some may not realize is early intervention is federally and state mandated, just like K through 12 special education. So what I want to echo is something that you had eloquently pointed out, that without MA dollars, it will not only impact the 65% of the families we serve. So we're talking about 1,700 of our families rely on this insurance for what Gwen had pointed out to be not the extras, but the necessities. But what we fear, and what I fear as an administrator, is we are required by law to participate in MA reimbursement. Just my program alone obtained $653,000 from MA. I am having difficulty delivering these federally and state mandated special education services, and without this MA contribution, I fear that I won't be able to. I have no tax base. I'm federally and state funded, and I rely on this MA contribution to do that. So when Dorothy pointed out that this not only affects the special education students, but it affects regular education students, people need to stop thinking that this is just for people who are of low income or just for families, because the money has to come from somewhere. This is federally and state mandated. So we're really fearful of what will happen. We're working, Tom and I work closely at the state level because our funding for preschool early intervention isn't adequate as it is. So if we're also looking at losing the $653,000 just for Lancaster and Lebanon IU, that will be catastrophic to our program.